I'm James from BikeLockWiki, and in this video we'll be testing and comparing the Hiplok Switch and the Foldylock Clipster. First up, we have the hammer test, where we strike either lock 10 times with a 1.8 kilo lump hammer to simulate a brute force attack. The switch up first, which was new to begin with. The lock took a good beating, but I didn't seem to inflict any significant damage with their hammer. Followed by the Foldylock Clipster, which also worked as it should before testing. The Clipster performed similarly to the switch and didn't appear to suffer any significant damage. Upon closer inspection of the Clipster, I did find a fragment of its plate had detached from one of the hammer blows, but your bike would have still been secure, and apart from this, there was only cosmetic damage to the outer plastic of the lock, which still worked as it should. One of the Hiplok Switch's rivets had compacted slightly, causing that rivet to stiffen up completely, but apart from this, the switch only suffered cosmetic damage and worked as it should afterwards. HSS Hacksaw testing up next, which shows whether or not a lock has been through a proper hardening process. Clipster up first, and I used a new blade since the previous one was blunt. After just under 2 minutes and making almost zero progress cutting through the Clipster, I gave up. Locks 1, HSS blade nil. Hiplok Switch and the vise next, which I replaced the blade for and got to work with. Again, after 2 minutes, I had a very tired arm and had made little to no progress, so I gave up on the HSS saw. Locks 2, HSS blade nil. I then removed the plastic coating from either lock to give a clearer view of the damage that the saw had inflicted. Whilst the Foldylock Clipster took a slightly deeper cut, it's fair to say that both of these locks passed the HSS test with flying colours, both blunting the blades used to cut them. Next, the test that all folding locks fear, the rivet test. Rivets on a folding lock are one of the weakest points, so brands attempt to protect them in a number of different ways. Upon first inspection, I thought I'd be able to cut through the Hiplok Switch's rivets in seconds, since they looked pretty vulnerable and unprotected. However, after struggling for almost 2 minutes, I hadn't even managed to get the switch into the jaws of my 24-inch bolt cutters, as the plates are too wide and the plastic coating was slipping out of the jaws of the cutters, so I gave up. The Foldylock Clipster up next, which is the first time I've tried cropping this lock's rivets, but knowing of Foldylock's advanced rivet protection, I assumed it would follow the switch in performance. After a minute, I'd started to make some progress and was getting closer to the rivet, so I carried on. After around 3 minutes, which is slightly longer than I'd usually try for, the rivet split from the pressure of the bolt cutters. An unexpectedly good performance from the switch, and a questionable performance from the Clipster, which succumbed to the bolt cutters despite its extensive internal rivet protection. Rivet attacks to one side, now I wanted to test the quality of either lock's plates. Starting with the switch, I clamped down on its plates using the same 24-inch bolt cutters. Straight away, I could feel the jaws of the bolt cutters squishing into the plates, so I carried on, and in under 1 minute the plate gave way. I retightened the bolt cutters and got to work with the Clipster, giving it the same treatment as the switch, but it was much more resistant to cropping, and despite using my full body weight as leverage, after 2.5 minutes, the Clipster's 5mm plate was still in one piece. A very poor performance from the switch here, which uses thinner plates than the Clipster, but I just wasn't expecting it to crop so easily. This may be the reason why it received a lower sold secure rating than the Clipster, which I cover later in the review. Next, the tool that keeps every cyclist awake at night, the angle grinder. I need to clarify now that neither of these locks are designed to resist power tools. So for comparison, here's a clip of me cutting the Kryptonite New York Standard, which received the Sold Secure Pedal Cycle Gold rating, so slightly more secure than both of these, and uses a 16mm thick hardened steel shackle. After cutting the New York Standard 5 times, it took me an average of 15.7 seconds to cut, which is respectable for any U-lock that doesn't utilize anti-grinder technology. Now first up, we have the Hiplok Switch, which started out with a few strong cutting times, much more resistant than I originally thought it would be. Over the 5 cuts, the Hiplok Switch averaged 15.84 seconds per cut, a crazily good performance when compared to the Kryptonite New York Standard, and one I simply wasn't expecting. Cutting the switch had worn my cutting disc away to its limit, so I replaced the disc for the Clipster's turn. The Clipster cut noticeably quicker from the off, but still put up a good fight against the grinder. The times gathered from this test aren't a representation of how quickly a thief could cut these locks on the street. On the street, both of these locks would be much more difficult to hold still, whereas I'm cutting them in lab conditions using a vise, so it would take longer than shown here. Overall, the Clipster gave an average cutting time of 12.61 seconds, a respectable time but still slightly quicker to cut than the switch. This test, alongside the others, suggests that the Hiplok Switch's plates use a harder steel than the Foldylock Clipsters. And finally, the last test we'll do to compare the security of these two locks is the nut splitter test. I was interested to see how the Switch performed since I was unable to break its rivets during the Bolt Cutter rivet attack, but after nearly 4 minutes of tightening the nut splitter, it became too tight to progress and I stopped the test there. Very impressive resistance from the Switch's rivets, which you can see here took some damage but resisted pulling through the plates, like what happened when I tested the A-Bus Bordeaux 6000 in my previous review. Fodlylock Clipster up next, which was equally resistant to the nut splitter. I've managed to cut these rivets with a nut splitter before, but clearly CT-Lock's rivet protection got in the way here and did its job this time round, providing good protection to the rivet throughout the 4-minute attack. Both locks showcasing surprisingly good rivet protection here. With destruction testing out of the way, we'll now take a look at the features and characteristics of both of these locks. I do recommend watching this section as it will help you understand if either of these locks are suitable for you and your bike. Both of these locks are designed to be lightweight and highly portable, and they've both achieved this. The Foldylock Clipster weighs in at 900 grams or 2 pounds, whereas the Hiplok Switch weighs approximately 950 grams or 2.1 pounds. Along with its clip mount, the Switch weighs approximately 1 kilo, making it slightly heavier, but the difference in weight between the two locks is hardly noticeable. Looking at the internal locking areas of either lock, the Hiplok Switch is slightly larger, measuring 25 by 12 centimeters, compared to the Clipster, which measures 21 by 10 centimeters. Whilst there is a slight difference in the internal locking space of these two folding locks, the most effective locking technique for both of these is the same, but this also explains why the Hiplok Switch is heavier than the Foldylock Clipster. Both of these locks use hardened steel plates. Now the Fodlylock Clipster's plates measure 5mm thick and 17.9mm wide. The Hiplok Switch's plates measure 4mm thick and 24mm wide, which does explain why the plates were easier to crop with my 24-inch bolt cutters. Security ratings from independent testing are one of the factors you should definitely consider when buying any bike lock. Sold Secure are one of the most well-known security rating organizations and provide guidance on what each of their ratings mean. The Foldylock Clipster earned the Sold Secure Pedal Cycle Silver rating, which means, in Sold Secure's words, it'll offer theft resistance against an enhanced tool list aimed at preventing more determined attacks. To simplify this for you, the Clipster isn't suitable for long-term overnight lockups, but it's a great option for shorter stop-offs and may be suitable as a primary bike lock depending on the value of your bike. The Hiplok Switch earned the Sold Secure Pedal Cycle Bronze rating, meaning, again in Sold Secure's words, it offers theft resistance against a basic tool list, this time aimed at preventing opportunist theft. So the Pedal Cycle Bronze rating is essentially for locks that stop somebody from just walking away with your bike. At BikeLockWiki, we don't recommend the use of any locks below the Pedal Cycle Silver category, as they simply won't provide adequate security for the majority of bikes. I do need to make it clear that neither of these locks are secure enough for use with high-value e-bikes or other high-value bicycles. If you're riding an e-bike, you'll want to use a lock from the Sold Secure Powered Cycle category, which are slightly more expensive but considerably more secure. Comparing the price of these locks, they're both affordable, especially when compared to other folding bike locks. U-locks offering higher security levels are available at cheaper prices than both of these, but if you're after a lightweight and highly portable lock, I've left links where you can view the most up-to-date prices for either of these locks down in the description below. One of the first things you'll notice with the locking mechanisms of both of these locks is the lack of a keyhole cover. This will mean that dirt, grime and other foreign particles can end up building up inside the lock's cylinder, but this won't cause any damage if you routinely maintain your lock. Fortunately, we recently published the most comprehensive guide on bike lock maintenance, so go ahead and check that out if you've been neglecting your lock for years. Both locks are supplied with 3 keys, meaning you'll always have 2 spares available should you lose one. Both sets of keys are also coded, so you can easily get replacements cut if required. The Foldylock Clipster uses a slider locking cylinder, similar to what you'd see being used on most cars and automobiles. Like all of CT-Lock's products, the cylinder is super smooth to operate, and with over 5 years of experience with their products, I'm yet to experience a jam with this locking cylinder. The Switch uses a disc detainer locking mechanism, which is the market standard for bike locks. This cylinder also works smoothly, and over the last 2 weeks of using the lock, I've had no complaints with it. I quite commonly get viewers commenting on how easy a lock would be to pick, but this isn't something you should be worrying about with either of these locks. Picking locking mechanisms like these takes a lot of time and skill to learn, but it also requires specialist tools which aren't readily available in most DIY stores. In reality, thieves aren't picking locks on the street. Instead, they're using tools like bolt cutters and angle grinders to steal your bike. The Foldylock Clipster is exactly the same as the Foldylock Mini, but with the addition of a mounting clip, allowing you to carry it wherever you like. The clip helps to keep the lock in place, but is more suitable for attaching to thicker materials like belts and bag straps, whereas it doesn't pinch down far enough on some materials to hold it super securely. If you want extra mounting options for it, it can be used with the Foldylock Mini's mount, which can be purchased separately. I'm a big fan of the mounting system that CTLOK offer for their folding locks. Despite being slightly stiff to begin with, it's designed to hold the lock still when riding, which usually means a rattle-free ride, but for some reason the locking mechanism used by both of these locks make loud rattling noises. I haven't experienced this before with any of CTLOK's products. That said, the rattling noise from the Hiplok Switch is definitely louder and more noticeable when riding. I have to say the Switch is one of the nicest designs I've seen from any folding bike lock. Its minimalist, futuristic design is not only good to look at, but it's super versatile as well. Just like the Clipster, the Switch can clip onto your bag strap, pocket or belt, providing quick access to your lock when out riding. But if you'd rather mount the Switch to your bike, you can attach its 2-in-1 mounting system to your frame and then slide the Switch in for easy transportation. I always take a look at the packaging choices brands are opting for, as I much prefer the use of easily recyclable materials such as cardboard over mixed material packaging, which normally ends up in the bin. For the Switch, Hiplok use a single cardboard backing plate and a zip tie to secure the keys to the lock. The lock is mounted to the cardboard plate, which removes the need for any plastic and makes recycling the waste very simple for customers. CTLOK use mixed material packaging with almost all of their locks. This is a blister packaging layer covered on both sides by cardboard, which is impressively difficult to separate and therefore much more difficult to recycle. If you decide to use either of these locks, the best way to lock your bike with them would be to lock the rear wheel and frame of your bike to an immovable object. If you then want to increase the security of your bike with this locking technique, I recommend the use of a secondary bike lock or a cable extension to secure the front wheel of your bike. To summarise, it's actually a much closer call between these locks than I'd previously expected before testing. If I had to guess, I'd say that the Hiplok Switch narrowly missed out on the Sold Secure pedal cycle silver rating, or that the Clipster narrowly met the requirements for the silver rating. There really isn't too much between them. The Clipster's 5mm plates were uncroppable with the same 24-inch bolt cutters, whereas the Switch's 4mm plates were fairly easy to cut. On the other hand, the Clipster's rivet was compromised by the 24-inch bolt cutters, whereas the Switch's wider plates prevented it from being inserted into the bolt cutter's jaws. I'd love to use the Switch with my bike because it's such a nice looking and functioning lock, but sadly its Sold Secure bronze rating only makes it suitable for preventing opportunist theft, which isn't good enough for me. If you have any comments or questions regarding either of these locks, leave a comment down in the description below and I'll get back to you. Otherwise, hit a like and subscribe to the channel for more bicycle security content like this. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.